My name is Koenraad Elst. I am PhD of Oriental Philology and History, more colloquially known as Orientalism. I have written 32 books, of which about half are on Hinduism or the situation of Hindu society and the difficult relations with other religious communities. So, on your topic about English-speaking Hindus, let me say first of all that there is nothing against any particular language. You know, I mean, in the course of history, the Vedic tradition, other elements of Hinduism have gradually been taken over by a number of newcomers, like the Mundas, who are not indigenous, they come from Southeast Asia. And so what? So right now we see a rather large-scale translation going on of Hindu texts into English. It started already like 1800 into French, into German and so on. Now practically everything in Hindu is available in English here or there. And there are very many born Hindus growing up speaking still Hindi or Telugu or whatever at home, or even not at home, but only with their grandparents when they come over on a visit. And so, effectively, for now already several million of Hindus, English is becoming the mother tongue, respectively Spanish, German, and so on in those countries. And that's no problem. You see, a few terms, a few specific Hindu philosophical terms are going to remain in Sanskrit, like karma, like dharma. But generally, you know, the insights that are typical of Hindu dharma, they are being translated, they are being understood by people who don't know any Indian language. And that in itself is no problem, that's just the way it is going. Right, let's talk about the role of the English language in India. So, the first Englishmen who settled here were with the East India Company, and they made deals with the Mughal rulers. They were not in power. Even when they became powerful enough to dethrone the Mughals, they kept playing the game, you see, honoring the Mughal emperor and so on, trying to keep everything as it was, but meanwhile making money and increasing their power. And at that time, there was not really any racism at work. Like there were many East India Company men who married local women. And so this is the start of the Anglo-Indian community. So it's only in the early 19th century that it starts to change. So more and more the East India Company is getting the responsibility for administering parts of India. So they have to take some decisions in the matter of the school language, the schooling language, and the whole education system. You have two different parties among the British rulers. You have the Orientalizers, or I dare say Orientalists, who favor native education in the native language. And then you have the Anglicizers, most famously and most decisively Thomas Babington Macaulay, who favor the introduction of English education through the English medium. And so that sets a trend first in Bengal, later in most of India, where elite people send their children to English medium schools. And so English very much becomes the language of the elite, not even of the foreign rulers, but of the native Indian elite. So So, for example, Motilal Nehru, the father of Jawaharlal, he forbade his family members to speak Hindi at the dinner table. So he introduced English in his own house. Or a similar case is Sri Aurobindo. You see, he was sent to England to get educated because his father wanted to make him a proper Englishman. And he became a proper Englishman. Not only did he know English very well, that was becoming ordinary, he also knew Latin, Greek, German and French, and quite well, winning prizes in, competitions and so on. So he was a model Westerner. Yet he felt Indian. He refused to work for the British. He came back to India and he involved himself in the freedom movement. And he started studying Hindu philosophy. And so later on he developed his own variation on Hindu philosophy, this integral yoga and so on. So there you have the case of an English-speaking Indian who becomes Hindu again. Nehru is just the opposite case. In his case, he wanted to have as little to do with India. And so he looked down on the Indian people. And he made it his mission to change Indian culture to make it as Western as possible. Right? So these are the two options for the English-speaking Hindu community. It is to de-Hinduize and Westernize, or it is to persist in Hinduism and make it feasible even through English media. Most people in the outside world don't know the Hindu position, don't know the Hindu predicament, and therefore they're not very sympathetic to it. We have a proverb in our language, unknown makes unloved, and so that's the situation of the English. So you are up against an enormous wall of prejudice. And a second thing is, and it overlaps largely, at the moment in the West there is a strong bias in favor of Islam. Because you see, they all think that they can prove their multiculturalism, their post-Christian enlightened worldview and so on, by taking up the cause of Islam. And so that means that when they hear about India, they look at it through this pro-Islamic lens. So they are not on your side. Then when it's specifically about Hinduism, the only thing that they know about Hinduism, or think they know, is caste. You see, for them, Hinduism is caste, holy caste, and nothing but caste. And they don't like it, generally because they don't like inequality, or not publicly at any rate. And secondly, you should see there has been in the past centuries a history of slavery which got an increasingly racial character, then a movement against slavery which took also a pretty militant character with a civil war in the United States, killing 2% of the white population, with the British Empire combining its imperial expansion with the fight against slavery. So once they themselves had abolished slavery and the slave trade, they started imposing it on other countries, like the Ottoman Empire to the extent possible. In the Arab countries it still persisted. And on the Mughal Empire, of course. So in India, slavery was abolished by Shivaji whenever Muslim territories came back into Hindu hands. And then later it was abolished within the Mughal Empire by the British or under British pressure. And so this idea of fighting against racial slavery, that has lingered somewhat, to the extent that when we now hear of racial slavery still existing, we know that we must be up in arms against it. Now, where in the world today do you find racial slavery? Well, in the Western mind, that is in India. Because they think, first of all, that the caste system is very much the law of the land in India, not knowing that on the contrary there are many anti-caste laws and even reverse discrimination. And they think that this is a racial system because of the Aryan invasion theory from the 19th century. They still think that this is a kind of racial apartheid system imposed by the white invaders on the dark natives. So that's why there is a strong bias against Hinduism. So there was the Muslim factor, there is the social justice factor, and the anti-racist factor, right? I read on Twitter many Hindu hotheads who say, oh yeah, Westerners are all racist, blah, blah, blah. No, at the moment, it is anti-racism that is having the most anti-Hindu effect on mentalities in the West. They identify Hinduism with racism, yes? So, well, you know, to make a long story short, you have an uphill battle. You see, there is very little comprehension of the Hindu position. So there is nothing, you know, you can do as a shortcut. You have to go that difficult path of gradually refuting all those misunderstandings. Maybe that's not the only thing. That's the type of thing I am working on. Maybe there are other aspects of it that I don't sufficiently realize. And so I know that, for example, after Pahalgam, a military reaction, you know, was opportune. So I don't have any advice to give about that. But I understand that that is very much also in America, many Hindus who are involved in societies for the preservation of their Telugu language or Konkani language or whichever native language. And yes, I understand that, but I also see that their own children are becoming at home in English, and they know, they still know some Telugu, their children in turn won't. And so what? You see, Hinduism can perfectly flourish in English just as well. Like, for example, the president of India, Draupadi Murmu, or president of Bharat, as the BJP government says. Okay, so the president of Bharat, she's Draupadi Murmu, and she speaks Santhali. Santhali has been made by the Vajpayee government one of the official languages of India. Now, Santhali belongs to the Munda language family, which is not native to India. Usually they're called Adivasis, Aboriginals, but actually they're immigrants. At the time of the supposed Aryan invasion from the northwest, in reality, what was happening was a Munda invasion from the southeast. You see, their demographic point of gravity till today is Vietnam. So, you know, that's more or less where they come from. And so they became very much Hindu. Look at Draupadi Murmu's name. You see, her parents have named her after a major character in the Mahabharata. See? So, you see, this Hinduism has entered into them, you know, has assimilated them. And so the same thing is going to happen with English-speaking people. Yes, recently, Sanskrit has been given a certain official status in parliamentary proceedings. And that's not much. You know, you won't notice if you're not a member of parliament. But still, symbolically, it's a good step towards a rehabilitation of Sanskrit which has been very much neglected in India recently. In fact, Western professors of Sanskrit have lamented the fact that they do not find many people in India anymore who know about ancient Indian linguistics, who know Apabhransha and Pali and so on. So this is all withering, and it is very good that at least Sanskrit is making a little comeback. For your information, there is something similar going on in the West. You see, in the 80s, 90s, there was a decline in Oriental studies, with some very prestigious chairs of Sanskrit in Germany and England being closed down. But now there is a certain revival, with Sanskrit courses starting in Ireland, in Germany, in England. So this may be a little blip that doesn't mean anything, but it may also be the start of a real revival. So here, this is then your work cut out for you. Make sure that Sanskrit really catches on. So, Snehilji, I am rather surprised to hear of your work. I didn't know of it. And so I acknowledge that indeed it is important. It reaches a dimension that I hadn't even thought of. And so taking it to the international level at some point is going to find comprehension in some circles. So as a way of bypassing the anti-Hindu prejudices that you are up against, it's a very important struggle, so I'm all for it, and if I can contribute any to it, I'd like to do that.